the Palestinians live there. Is that something that you've noticed? Is that something that the Americans have been encouraging? Have you played a role in asking the leaders to get out those statements?
We have encouraged the parties to be positive in their outlook, in their words, and in their actions. Any realistic appraisal of the situation, including the recent history, by which I mean the last 2 decades, makes clear that there are very serious differences between the parties, that there are many difficulties which lay ahead, both in terms of the substance of the issues, the impact on their domestic politics, the needs and interests of their societies. We have not, of course, attempted to prescribe what they can or should say about any issue. These are independent and extremely able leaders representing the interests of their societies. What we have sought to convey in innumerable conversations that I have had personally with both leaders over many, many months is President Obama's conviction that despite all of the difficulties, near-term, long-term, political, substantive, personal, and otherwise, the paramount goal of making the lives of their citizens more safe, more secure, more prosperous, more full, can best be achieved by a meaningful and lasting peace between the parties and in the region. That the alternative to that poses difficulties and dangers far greater to the individuals, to the leaders, to their societies, than those risks which they run in an effort to reach an agreement that brings about their lasting peace. That any realistic evaluation of the self-interest of the people of Israel and the Palestinian people must, in our judgment, conclude that they are far better off living side by side in 2 states in peace and security than in a continuation of the current situation.
2 last questions here.
Yeah, Mohammed Said Louafi, France 24, Washington. Senator, Prime Minister Netanyahu mentioned Iran this morning. Wouldn't that be making things more difficult for you to close the gap between the 2 parties?
In every aspect of human life, including your personal life and mine, the world is much different today than it was 10 years ago, and vastly different than it was 20 years ago. And that is certainly true of the Middle East. It is an area of rapid change, of many conflicting currents that historians and analysts have described far better than I could in any exchange we have here. But obviously, the actions and policies of the current government of Iran have an effect in the region and in the wider world. And they influence what is occurring here. And in my judgment, they add another argument to those which I've already made and which many others have made as to why this conflict should be resolved. It is in the interests of the people involved. And in this respect, the word comprehensive peace is directly relevant. Please recall that when President Obama announced my appointment 2 days after taking office, he specifically identified comprehensive peace as the objective of U.S. policy in the region. Israel and the Palestinians, Israel and Syria, Israel and Lebanon, Israel at peace with all of its neighbors in normal relations. And obviously, one of the factors that makes that desirable, in my judgment, necessary for all of these parties is, in part, the actions and policies that have been and are being taken by the government of Iran. Yes, so it is a factor. Even if it didn't exist, there would be a compelling reason for peace between Israelis and Palestinians. But it's an additional factor.
Last question.
Senator Lori Uri, CNN. Peace negotiations between the parties have taken place, obviously, several times in the past. What is Secretary Clinton doing differently than her predecessors, including President Clinton?
Although my comment on that is not constrained by the agreement which I earlier described, there are other constraining factors which come into play that somehow come right into my head as you completed the question. Since I was not a part of the immediately preceding administration, although I did serve at the request of President Clinton and the then Prime Minister of Israel and the President of the Palestinian Authority as chairman of an international commission in 2000 and 2001, following the eruption of the Second Intifada. I'll tell you my own belief. First, we can't be deterred by the fact that previous efforts didn't succeed. The cause of peace is so important, so just, indeed, not trying to use hyperbole, so noble, that it must continue, notwithstanding prior efforts at failure. Indeed, an argument can be made to the reverse, that the prior failures create an even more compelling imperative to proceed now. Secondly, with respect to past efforts, as I've said previously, not today but at an earlier briefing, we think that the best approach is to carefully review them, as we have done, and to try to draw the best lessons out of each one, not be bound by any particular practice or process or procedure, and always trying to keep in mind the dynamic changes in the region that have occurred in what is, in historical terms, a very short period of time. So what we don't, I've been asked often, is this a continuation of Annapolis? Is it a continuation of some other process? Our view is this is an effort that will try to learn from the lessons of the past, to take the best and bring them forward, but not be bound by any label or category or previous process. Everything should be judged on the basis of what it will do to advance, help us advance to achieve the ultimate goal of peace in the region. Now, one obvious difference is that President Obama is the only president in recent times, to my knowledge, to have established this as a high priority immediately upon taking office and to have acted immediately at that time. There have been many very well-written books on the history of the past 20 years. I think I've read most of them, and it's very clear that at least in a couple of instances, time ran out. Indeed, the authors of several of these books used exactly those words to describe the problem. They ran out of time at the end. Well, this president, I believe, will succeed. But as he said yesterday, neither success nor failure is predetermined or guaranteed, but it isn't going to be because time ran out at the end. So that's a vast difference. I have a high opinion of the men and women who served in these tasks in the past. I know most of them personally, and I don't think you can attribute inability to achieve a result to their individual or collective failings. They are the product of the difficulty and what many regard as the intractability of the problems and issues. But we believe that there are dynamic changes that occur. There are the more obvious difficulties that lie ahead for both sides if they don't reach agreement. That may be even more obvious than they were 5 or 8 or 12 years ago. You have to remember that these leaders must weigh two things. They must weigh the difficulties they face in getting agreement, and they must weigh the difficulties they will face if they don't get an agreement. And we believe it's a very powerful argument. If you subject these to careful, reasoned, and rational analysis to conclude that the latter difficulties, if they don't get an agreement, will be much greater and have a much more profound impact on their societies than those they face in trying to get an agreement. Thank you all very much. It's been a pleasure to see you, and I look forward to reporting to you on a regular basis.
Good. Oh, that was great.